And in terms of the structure of this call, there'll be about 10 minutes or so at the beginning where I'll just kind of give a bit of an intro, mainly talking about the brief and some background to it, how this session will run. Then the bulk of this session will be a Q&A. The way we'll do that is we'll give everyone some time to kind of reflect, collect their thoughts and write their questions down in a shared document. And then we'll kind of go through those one by one, pausing after each to kind of get some additional thoughts, questions for clarity, things like that. Fingers crossed we'll cover everything, just depends how much we have. If there are some questions as well that we can't answer in the session, we'll get back to everyone by tomorrow at the latest by email with an answer to that. So that's kind of the plan. And so that's the admin stuff out of the way. In terms of giving a bit of background, so this conversation, this Q&A is about the network learning brief. There are multiple Q&As about different briefs. So if you signed up thinking this was for another one, don't worry, but you're welcome to kind of drop off if this isn't the kind of brief that you're interested in. So this is the network learning partner brief that we're going to be talking about today. And that brief forms part of some work that we're kicking off at the moment, which is a response to the kind of COVID pandemic in partnership with the National Lottery Community Fund. So that's really what this kind of funding is coming from, and that's the primary focus of this work. In terms of Catalyst and what Catalyst is, so Catalyst is a network of organizations, so support providers, charities, funders, etc., that are all working towards a shared vision. And that vision is really to help civil society organizations improve their impact and meet the needs of their communities with design, technology, and data. So there's this big kind of shared goal that we're all working towards. How this relates to the network learning partner is that we've got all of these projects, all of these partners, disparate organizations. We want to understand, are we moving towards this shared goal? How might we understand the impact that we're having towards this vision? We're all making small kind of parts, we're all contributing small elements to that broader vision. But really, how does it all add up? And how does that connect to each other? Where is there shared learning across that? And how might we also start to understand the result of this for organizations themselves, but also as a broader network and society? So that's really the context, and I suppose that the framing of what this is and what the role is about. It's about looking across all of these projects, all of these various actors, understanding how are they meeting the needs of their target audiences, and what is that resulting in? I think it's mindful to kind of recognize that what that's resulting in, that kind of second part to that question, is a long-term thing that we'd expect to understand. And this is kind of a 5-month contract. So, we totally appreciate that is, might be challenging within that time. And so the emphasis would certainly be on how are they meeting their needs, right, as the primary focus. And if we can get any additional information in terms of how that's resulting in kind of short-term impact, that'd be really super. So I'll pause there for a moment to kind of let that sink in. If you have any questions relating to any of this blurb I'm saying now, just jot them down, and then we'll definitely have time to cover them. I just want to kind of explain some stuff. Right now, I'm going to share my screen as well, because I just wanted to look at the brief and pick out a few bits in that are particularly important. So share screen. There we go. So hopefully you can see a kind of browser window, and it says Network Learning Partner. The main area actually in this brief that I wanted to focus on was, where are we? Expected outcomes for this work. I think if you're kind of sitting down to write an application or considering writing an application, this would be the area where I'd really focus. And in particular, when we're assessing applications, we'll be doing that next week, we'll be really looking for how you're addressing each of these expected outcomes. So there's kind of 4 main outcomes to this work that we're hoping to achieve as a result of this contract. These kind of sub-bullet points just for context, really, some suggestions, but you can kind of interpret these however you want. And the first one, it's really about understanding the network, what's going on there. I'm going to cover some questions that people have already posed, and one of the great questions that was asked was, well, what work is already going on? Like, how are we doing M&E already? To be honest, it really varies across all of the initiatives. For work that, my organization and we're kind of closer to leading, I can definitely speak to how we do that. But some initiatives are being led by partners, and, we have a good working relationship, but we don't know the inner details. And that's what really this first outcome is about. It's understanding what are these key initiatives, working with them, doing that audit, understanding what they're capturing, and then essentially building that picture. The second outcome, this is a really wonderful one. This is where the whole network notion of a network learning partner comes across. We kind of have a luxury of being able to look across multiple initiatives, multiple projects, multiple organizations, all working towards similar aims. And this second outcome is really about spotting where there's shared learning, shared challenges, commonality across those initiatives. And that's the real, I think, one of the big ideas behind Catalyst operating as a network is to say we can have a collective impact and we can learn things quicker collectively. So that's what the second outcome is all about. The third outcome is kind of more practical. This is about, we're going to have so much learning, there's going to be so much activity going across the network. What's the best way to share that information with members of the network and the wider kind of sector at large? And again, what I've said here is, you know, easily we could definitely do some reports, but we really welcome kind of more creative ways to do this. And then finally, and by no means kind of least, we see this kind of contract as an ability to really test what's the best way for us to operate as a network, and more importantly, learn as a network, you know, across this collection of organizations, variously linked. How are we making that impact? How might we sum up that impact to understand the more global picture of the change that we're making? How might we identify where there's learning across this network of organizations? And that's what this final kind of outcome is about. It speaks to sustainability. Ideally, we walk away from this contract with an approach that we can build on and we can embed, and that recognizes the kind of constraints that the network operates in. So how it's currently structured is that there's a core team that coordinates the network, and then individual partners kind of deliver their own work towards the kind of shared outcomes. So just recognizing that dynamic and testing and coming up with an appropriate model for reporting. I mean, that's a really interesting question. How might we do collective reporting? What does that look like from a partner? What is their incentive in terms of collective reporting? And how does that then show us what we want to see in a meaningful way? And who wants to see that? Like, anyway, I'm getting into the detail of how you might tackle it, but that's what that's all about. So I'll stop sharing my screen if I can. Where are we? There we go. Oops, no, that was my mistake. There's just one more thing I wanted to share, which was some key documents. So in this brief, we link out to some key documents. If you haven't seen them already, I'll just kind of highlight them to you. If you scroll down to how suppliers will be evaluated, there's this link that you can follow, and it will take you to the assessment guidance. So this essentially shows you all of the questions that will be in the application form, how they link out to different criteria that we're using. If you scroll down even all the way to the bottom, you will see, there we go, assessment. This is our kind of scoring, how that will work as well, just so we're like really transparent, like that's how it will work. Everyone will kind of go through this process. There'll be multiple assessors per application. We'll be doing that next week. So you can kind of look through that and how the weighting works. So for example, the responding to your understanding of the brief and all of these additional questions will kind of make 50% of your kind of total score. And then there's finally on here, I think it's at the bottom. Yes, questions asked by suppliers. So I just wanted to cover some of the questions we've already received. And we can definitely go into more detail as this kind of call continues. But I just thought I'd kind of highlight these because I thought they were really great questions. So firstly, there are two broadly similar questions, which is like, you know, what is the existing process in place for monitoring and evaluation? Yeah, what do you already have in place? Are there any requirements? So starting on this first one, the general kind of answer here is that every initiative has its own kind of approach to monitoring the outcomes and indicators. And it will really depend on the type of initiative. So for example, if we've got a training program, they might have outcomes around the learning objectives of that training program. Whereas if we have a digital tool, there's another kind of platform called service recipes, that might be around kind of reuse of the recipes on their site. So it's kind of really contextual to the type of service or intervention that's happening. But on top of that, there are shared indicators and outcomes. And you can follow that link in the brief to kind of see an example of some of those, where we're hoping that all initiatives can contribute to. And this is certainly a work in progress at the moment, but these are things like the raw number of organizations that have been supported by the network, or the particular demographics of organizations that have been supported. So there's an emphasis on supporting underrepresented communities through our current strategy and work. So that would be a shared indicator, an example of a shared indicator that individual initiatives are kind of reporting against. And the final bit here in answer to this question was that first outcome that I showed in the expected outcomes. That's kind of what we're hoping the learning partner will really take the lead on in terms of doing this audit, doing this analysis of what's already out there and determining how are they measuring it. And, I expect that would likely involve doing some primary research with initiative leads to understand the information they're capturing, how they're capturing it, what support needs they might have. And then that would inform the approach you could take moving on in terms of what is a collective approach to reporting that we can establish across all these initiatives that would really work. At the moment, we're just starting an audit of that, just very mindful of a network learning partner coming on board. So we're trying to start an audit so that we can hand that over to the learning partner and they have something to really hit the ground running. The only other thing to mention with this somewhat related question, because it asked about reporting, is that because a large part of the initiatives at the moment are coming from the National Lottery, they pass on some of their requirements. Many of their requirements are related to kind of COVID-specific questions that they have, and they provided a taxonomy of categories for us to classify different organizations that we work with against. That's all largely covered by various application processes that happen with different initiatives. And I wouldn't expect it's something that the learning partner has to worry about, but just useful information, because that was the question that was asked rather. And then just two more questions. So the brief mentions analytics and performance data. Are there M&E requirements for each of the initiatives? So the short answer to that is yes. Again, speaking to my previous point, some of these initiatives are kind of solely funded by very different organizations, and they will have their own organizational needs and their own funders for that piece of work. That will likely skew what they need to kind of report on. However, they're also part of the Catalyst network, and they've kind of made this commitment to say, we want to contribute to this shared objective or this shared vision. And I guess the learning partner's role in this is to understand, well, how can we align some of these things that you have to report on versus the things that are kind of shared things to report on? Is that even possible? And then the final question, a really great one, in terms of the length of responses to kind of add in terms of questions. So there is no length in terms of what you can submit practically in the application form. This is deliberate because it's such a pain having to, do wordsmithing. But what I would emphasize is, avoid overly long responses. 250 words should hopefully be enough, but 500, that's cool as well. Anything over that, though, I would say that's probably a bit overly long. Okay, so lots of me waffling on, but we're on time though. That's about a quick intro. What I would like us to do now is, David, if you're able to maybe share the link. So there's a link that David's going to share to a document. If you scroll right down to the bottom, this will be the document you would have seen previously when registering for this call. And there's a section in there, I'll highlight it, hopefully you can see it when it loads up for you. Questions for Catalyst. So what I'm going to invite everyone to do is to maybe spend 5 or so minutes just reflecting and adding in any specific questions. And then we'll go through them one by one after that. Is that okay for everyone? Show me a thumbs up. That's cool. Great.
Sorry, yeah. Can I just check that everyone's got the link that I posted in the chat and you're able to, okay? Yeah.
Yeah, so do you just want us to write the questions underneath the existing questions that you've just been through, Q&As that you've just had?
Yes, yes, please. That'd be great.
Okay.
So we'll just get them down there and then we'll kind of dive into a bit more of an open conversation around each of them. Super. And yes, if you're anything like me and you've got a very, you're concentrating, feel free to turn off your videos. You kind of jot those down. I'll give you kind of a heads up when we're out of time.
Being asked to request access.
Okay, let's check that.
Request edit access. Ah, so I'm looking at the brief.
Yeah,
Okay.
so Damien, anyone with the link should be able to edit that document without needing access.
I've got it now, yeah.
Double check. Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Also, I'll say if it's easier for people, you can also jot questions into the chat. So just a couple more minutes if you've got any more to add. So just wrap up the question you're on and then we'll dive into them. Okay, all happy. And obviously if questions do appear to you through this, then we'll definitely take time to kind of jump in and go through them. This is just a way to kind of get it going. So I'll step through these and I'll stop after them as well to see if there's any kind of additional questions that relate to it or kind of questions for clarity. And the first question is really fab. To what extent is the network already on the same page in terms of a common vision what work has been done to bring them together, discuss and co-create that vision? Excellent question. I think to objectively answer that, I can't. I mean, I don't know in terms of how we'd objectively answer that at the moment. In terms of work that's already been done to kind of get there, we've had a number of kind of partner sessions, so kind of co-creation sessions where we introduced the vision of what we're trying to achieve and got them involved in shaping the vision, as well as a launch event. However, this was, gosh, kind of summer last year. And since COVID kind of happened, the strategy and the kind of focus has really changed. In particular, there's been a much stronger focus on working on at-risk kind of communities. So that's something slightly new, and then checking in again with kind of partners in terms of how that aligns hasn't been something that's done. So I think the partners that are certainly listed in the initiatives, they are in line with that vision, particularly because they're either already signed up to contribute their own resources or are receiving resources to contribute to the vision. So that's kind of the main alignment around that. But beyond that, there's certainly always more work we could do on that. So that's the first stab at an answer. Like, does that make sense for anyone? Any additional questions for clarity or related questions that arise from that? Feel free to shout out if you've got one. Okay, no worries. So I'll kind of leave a bit. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I think that covered it pretty well, Suraj. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. I just like to leave a bit of a gap because yes, the good old fun of Zoom, you can never read body language. So I'll normally leave like kind of 5 or seconds after a thing, and after that I'll just kind of move on.
Yeah.
Happy days. So okay, where are we? And thank you, David, as well for kind of adding in notes. The eligibility application and assessment guidance under eligibility says, I am a digital agency that would like to respond to a support brief. Does this mean applicants for the learning partner need to be a digital agency? No. So I think we've got lots of briefs going on, and the vast majority are focusing on kind of agency style organizations supporting charities directly. And the way our kind of contract management system or application system works here, I think there was limitations in how we could kind of have that conditional thing happening. So we kind of, we took that hit, but it's a really important question to ask. No, as long as you are an incorporated organization and you meet the other kind of requirements, please feel free to apply. Anything else on that one? Or questions of clarity? Super. Moving on, so are you happy for a consortia, 2 partners to bid jointly? Yes. However, it would be good if one partner could be named as a lead in the application. And I think, again, because how the application form is set up, that lead partner would have to kind of submit the application as well. But if there's a consortia, great, detail that in the budget as well, in terms of how that's kind of presented. There's a Google Doc spreadsheet you can use, so kind of make that work for how that works for you guys. And I guess if there are any specific challenges with inputting the data to make it work for a consortia, just drop us a message, because it's not something we explicitly set up the system to do, and it might, you might hit some edge cases in terms of trying to put in the information you need. Any questions for clarity on that? Super. Okay, and the last one we got here. So in the list of initiatives, can you explain the cascade from participating orgs to the number of further orgs in their network, e.g. 50, then 10 more equals 556 stakeholders? So yes, let's take an example if I bring one up. This is really an approximation. And so many of these initiatives, the way they're designed to work, or their target audience, are, we call them network or anchor organizations. These are essentially infrastructure organizations that have a network themselves. So the particular organization being supported with kind of digital capability building will be a network organization. So let's say Mind, the kind of mental health charity. There's a headquartered kind of central organization that would be supported. However, they would be supported to work with their network of local Mind centers and organizations. And that's how the scaling up works. The ambition or the target varies per initiative, but it ranges from about 10 further organizations all the way up to 100 further organizations benefiting from or being supported by that primary organization that's being worked with. The reason that's in there as well, those kind of numbers, is just to give you a sense of stakeholders that you might want to engage in primary research. As an example, we certainly wouldn't expect you to, speak to all 500 or whatever on in each initiative, but you might want to sample, lower level stakeholders, secondary beneficiaries, where that makes sense. And again, that is definitely where it makes sense. Some initiatives that might not make sense to do so. Okay, so let me check. Have I answered that? Yes. Does that make sense? Any kind of questions on that? Yeah, Kira.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, to what extent do you, that's a huge amount of people. It's quite distal from the Catalyst work. And to what extent do you think that the impact is felt through the kind of the reaches of that network, that the large numbers of stakeholders? Is there an expectation that there will be kind of like attributable difference down there? Like, I'm wondering, like, I understand what the numbers is to give us a sense of, the scale of it, but to what extent does Catalyst believe that we have impact all the way out there, and you'd want a learning department to look there for impact? Yeah,
we don't know, and I think that's part of the role of the learning partner, to deem per initiative what's proportionate and reasonable in terms of the effort being put in. We definitely want to know what's the impact for, I guess, direct beneficiaries of work. However, secondary level beneficiaries, I think there'd be less of an emphasis. We're certainly still interested in it, but we're definitely more interested in the primary beneficiaries. And again, that's just recognizing, like, the style of intervention that's being undertaken. As an example, if we've got a network anchor organization and the approach they're taking is to develop some guidance for the organizations, we'd certainly want to know how many of their network organizations benefited from that guidance, and what was the result of that guidance being put out there. But that could be something you get from that anchor organization itself, rather than going directly to the kind of beneficiary organizations that they work with. Is that okay? Nice. Okay. And okay, so we've gone through all the questions there. I guess I just open up the floor now to, if there's any additional questions that have kind of popped up as we've gone through this that you'd like to ask, or comments in general. If not, that's totally cool. I'll just kind of wrap up then with some final reminders, and we can enjoy the sunshine, hopefully, wherever you are. But any kind of final questions or comments that have arisen?
I put a question in about the Discovery Learning Program, what actually it is, and I think somebody thought that I wanted to do it. Like, I don't want to deliver it. I just want to figure out how to evaluate it. Kind of like, what kind of, is it about how to do a discovery, like the first double diamond kind of thing? Is that what it is?
Yeah. And David, I might ask you to kind of dive into this, because I think you're a bit closer to that. But it's that essentially. So problem validation, it's how do you equip these charities, civil society organizations with the capabilities to undertake problem validation for themselves, before then hopefully applying for further investment and resource to go and develop solutions for that validated problem. Okay, you can ask another question if that didn't answer it, Kira. Is that okay?
So problem validation means figuring out what's going on, yeah, what their issue is. When you say problem validation, it's like, what's the research question? Is that kind of what you mean?
So this would be the organizations themselves understanding what the problem is from the perspective of their target audience, and they would likely themselves undertake user research to do that. Yeah.
Thanks.
Amongst other tactics, though, there are lots of ways to validate a problem. Yeah. Nice. Damien, did you have a question? Sorry, I think I got you in, yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, you mentioned the sustainability of the the initiative beyond this intervention. Would you be expecting some kind of recommendations at the end of this of how you might continue to capacitate the network to be a learning network, for example, and continue its, both on their own individual level, their network members level. It's a multi-tiered initiative you've obviously, happening, which probably would require a whole range of different sort of approaches to that kind of capacity development. And you mentioned you've got your own capacity, and you're hoping that this initiative will kind of put in place the kind of foundations for you to be able to take that forwards. Would you anticipate any further continued inputs, or is the kind of future resourcing really limited and focused on what you do internally?
Yeah, so I think you started off about asking about recommendations. Yeah, 100%. We would definitely welcome recommendations, and maybe even going a bit further, having the kind of infrastructure or basic tools or a framework that we could apply. That would be an absolute ideal to say, like, we've kind of tested this, but we're realistic as well. We'd want to hear about the challenges, and I fully expect there will be many challenges in terms of trying to embed collective reporting and learning. And I think that will be really useful for us to learn at the end of this piece of work. Looking beyond this piece of work, it's all funding dependent. So again, we are receiving a grant ourselves to kind of administer and kind of undertake this work. So it'll be useful to understand what can be undertaken with our existing resource. But then obviously, if that further funding does come along, we would certainly consider what's the best way to use that in terms of making a learning impact.
Yeah, great.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and often shared measurement and learning sits kind of alongside a range of other kind of parallel activities to help kind of bring a network together as a functional group that can sort of exert its own collective change into the future. Do you have a sort of parallel strategies to this learning part, this learning strand that are also, that would very much feed into this or reinforce this kind of approach?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so it kind of relates a bit to the work that David is part of and the team that he's involved with, which is all about the capacity of the support sector. So the organizations and the network that supports charity sector organizations to do digital. The capacity team essentially works with those partner members to make sure they're all aligned, that they can work together. So there's definitely a strong relationship there with that existing team and how we can encourage and work with partners. I think risk is an interesting question here, and I think there's a question in the application about what are some of the key risks to mitigate. When I reflect on this, I think one of the key risks to mitigate here is incentive. Like, how do you make sure people are really aligned and want to do this? It's not that you're going to have an answer in an application form, but I think what we'll be looking for is, like, how are you going to discover an answer? And also acknowledging that an answer might be hard to discover and we might not get it.
Yeah. And how to what extent would you, are you looking for sort of, almost an analysis of what other networks have done? Because it's obviously, precedent's been set in different parts of the world and different locations for this work, not necessarily within the, digital sector, but, in other sectors as well.
Yeah, and so I think this is where, when we were reflecting on the need to bring in a learning partner, we were very mindful of our own limited experience and expertise in this. So if there is further analysis that you recommend or existing work that you've been involved with that you could bring to bear, that would be a real advantage and something that would be positive to kind of factor into the work plan that you're thinking about. You'd have to balance that with really delivering on the main kind of research question. And I'd say if I was to distill this down into the primary research question, it would be, how are the initiatives across the network meeting the needs of their target audiences? I think that if 100% we want to walk away with that answer. Even better to that would be then what does that result in? But we have to acknowledge that, you know, that gets complicated pretty quickly. But that, yeah, that's how I'd kind of distill it. So as long as you can balance that broader research with kind of answering the main kind of research question, that would be really, really welcomed.
Yeah, great.
Okie dokie. So I just want to make sure I'm not, we're still good. We're still good. So any kind of other kind of questions or reflections? Super. So I'll just give a few kind of final reminders or wrap up points. So the deadline for this brief is Sunday, though we would really, really strongly advise to submit it as soon as possible so you kind of avoid technical issues and whatnot. We know for other briefs that we have open, there's, you know, people have kind of missed it just on the deadline because their computer wouldn't work, or, you know, who knows what went wrong with the site. So I personally, I just really recommend getting that in as soon as you're able to do, if you want to apply. And then kind of following that, so following Sunday, the Monday thereafter, that week is when we'll be doing assessments. We hope to be able to make decisions based on the application forms. However, that might not be possible. And if we need to, then we will arrange interviews with the appropriate partners on the Thursday of that week. But we'll communicate with you after applications are submitted to kind of arrange that, to make sure that works, and to give you guidance in terms of what you need to prepare. Most likely it'll focus on specific questions that we'll have for you. And then beyond that, I think the 18th, September 18th is when we hope to kind of inform suppliers. So we'll let everyone know of the outcome either way by then. So that's the kind of wrap up or admin bit that I had on my notes. But before kind of saying goodbye and thank you for your time, are there any kind of final questions or kind of comments?
Nothing my side. Thanks for
cool. Great. So it's wonderful to see you all, and really great questions to kind of go through. And hopefully we'll see an application from you guys. But in the meantime, have a wonderful rest of the day.